So we can start the meeting. Thank you all for being here to begin with. So obviously, calling this meeting to order. I don't have a script, but calling it to order. And just wanted to go over, there was a lot of work that was done during the last half session of last year. And so part of what our charge is to implement that. But before we start implementing that, I wanted to go over our current advisory committees and look at what's going on with them, particularly with our Family Life and Education Committee, because what was identified with our committee I don't want to say last year, because it wasn't really last year, but last half of the session, was that that's kind of an outlier. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Ms. Anderson, because she's the one that really looked into the differences that were going on and how that's even set up differently. And that maybe it is not the best place for it to live under the school board's purview.
Okay, so this was one of the reasons that I brought the forum topic at the end of the year, is that we needed to look specifically at a few of the existing standing committee, or not standing committees, the existing advisory committees, just to determine whether or not they still met the needs of the board in the same way. During the process that I revised those documents, or that I continued to work through the revisions of the documents and made sure that all of the coordinating governance documents were in line, including the policy and the governance manual. What I determined pretty fast is that FCPS is treated 100% different than any other advisory committee that we have. So what my recommendation is, or what I believe is the right path forward, is that we actually move that to be a superintendent advisory committee. Not that it would disrupt the number of members that we are appointing to that, but that it would no longer fall under the guidelines or the requirements of the advisory committees in our strategic governance manual, because of the fact that they don't do things the same way we do. It's run by a staff member. The charge is directed by the staff. They also have no need to create bylaws. They don't, so there are all kinds of things that they're already set up as different, and there's a regulation, so it's Regulation 1708, it manages them. And so I think that it is already being run as if it's a superintendent's advisory committee, and so it doesn't really change any of the structure, other than it takes some of the requirements off. That is also, and we've talked about this in the past, but that is also committee member, we have student committee members on that, and having it be that the committee, those students would have a place to speak, that it wasn't necessarily having to be publicized, particularly about family life education topics. I think that would also provide a level of protection for students that I think is really important moving forward. I think that the core of their meeting could still be public in any way that we would direct the superintendent to do, but I do think that is a committee that is completely outside the norm of how the rest of the committees are structured and work forward. So it would be my recommendation that we send a recommendation to the rest of the board that we officially move that one over to be a superintendent's advisory committee, and request to maintain the same structure of having us have a member on the committee. And so that way it would still be an appointee. I don't know for certain that there are any other advisory committees that are working the same way, but I would think it was similar to like what we just are in the process of doing with the social studies groups. So we have this structure built in other places. I think we just need to decide if that is a recommendation that makes sense for us to move forward, and then we would have to have the board vote on it to change it over.
Thoughts or opinions?
I mean, overall, I think that sounds fine to me. I think there'll be a handful of folks that are unhappy, right, in the community. They'll think that we are trying to push this under the rug or something. But I think for the reasons you identified, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, my intention is not to reduce transparency as to the work of that. The difference with this committee is that we also have to actually vote on anything that happens. So I think that we can present it as such. Any change that's made with family life education has to be brought to the board for a vote, because what we do in Fairfax County is different than the minimum state standard. So anything that we do has to require a board vote. So it's never going to be that the committee makes a decision that the board doesn't vote on. It's only going to be that they bring us recommendations. And so we're still working under the same structure. That's another reason why this committee works differently than every other committee does. And so I just think it's calling attention to that, and having it does provide safeguards for our students that are involved in those committees.
Madam Chair, do you have any staff person to support the work of our committee today? To ask some questions regarding FCPS?
Carrie Reynolds is the designator. No, Carrie Reynolds is who would typically be involved. I will tell you that Noelle Clemenco reached out to me because Carrie had asked her about the fact that we, in our new operating manual, it indicates that they need bylaws. So she was getting in touch with me to ask whether or not that they needed bylaws, because of the fact that I have referenced in several meetings that committee works differently. I told her that that PEC would be talking today about whether or not where this committee should stay, and asked her opinion. She said it made sense and that it seems like a cleaner path, in terms of just the fact that this is so different. Just so you also know, there were many aspects of how the committee was being handled in the language. The committee itself is not legally required. The committee itself, it's only having family life education that is legally required, which is one of the reasons that we changed it in the governance manual to not be. So it's state mandate, like it's allowed, but it's not necessarily.
So I guess Madam Chair, she's not here to answer questions from board members. Okay, that's too bad. But with a lot of information given by Ms. Anderson, I'm not doubting what she says, but I want you to just ask a step on record that what is the minimum requirement of the school board related to family life education curriculum in the state of Virginia? Would you be able to answer that, or would Ms. Anderson be able to answer that, or?
I would not be able to answer that, but I could certainly find the information for you to find out what that minimum requirement is.
I did talk to council last year
Okay.
about the minimum requirement. He indicated that the minimum requirement is for us to vote on family life education. So it's not, the committee has no legal, like we don't have any legal requirement for the committee itself. We only have a legal requirement related to family life education curriculum and plans. So that is the portion that we would actually be voting on. But I do think it's a good idea for us to take it to Mr. Foster and determine if this setup would align with what he wants, what we're legally required to do.
Right. I think the reason that we have this particular structure, my understanding was from long ago, was based upon the fact that we wanted to do slightly different from the rest of the state, or state guidelines. I mean, what you are doing is completely permitted, but our own unique way of doing it. And if we shift FCPS to as a superintendent's advisory committee as opposed to school board advisory committee, which it is right now, whether that changes anything that we are doing related to family life education. I mean, those are the questions that I wanted to ask a staff person to be sure before we made recommendations to shift that to the superintendent. Again, I'm not questioning Ms. Anderson's response. Just I wanted to be able to verify that from our professional staff.
So I would just like clarification in terms of shifting, because we still have to vote on anything that is recommended, and we still have representatives there. So what is your concern with the shift? Like, do you feel that the school board would not be having as much authority, or I'm just,
I mean, initially this was set up as a school board advisory. There had to be a reason why this was set up as a school board advisory committee as opposed to superintendent's advisory committee. Whether it was done that way because we had to do it that way.
okay,
I did go back and read the law. I do not think that there is a legal requirement for this to be an advisory committee under the school board. The other reason that this acts completely differently is if you look at policy 1710, this is the exception. FPAC and FLECAC are both the exception to that policy that staff doesn't even have to answer because it is a staff report. So this is really serving, I think that I agree with you. I do have some questions about historically why it was set up this way. I also would say if it's not acting the way it was intended historically, then I would rather have it be more clearly aligned or defined in the structure to align. Because otherwise, we're going to have different portions throughout all of our policies that exclude them from doing what we're asking everyone else to do. And as we're defining all of the different moments here, I do think that that's an aspect that we need to consider.
So, Madam Chair, could he pose those questions to a staff person to provide us maybe written responses?
of course, of course. I will say that my one concern when we were discussing this last year, based on some experiences that I've had with students, is protecting students. And because the way this is currently set up, their ability to be open and honest, I think, would be very difficult. And sometimes I think we lose sight of the fact that we're on boards as adults versus students and some of the consequences they may have to deal with if they're very frank and forthright. So that was an overriding concern for me when I was thinking about this and looking at this, based on some of my experiences that I've had with students and some conversations I've had about how comfortable they feel in some situations with being forthright. And student voice is really important to me.
So that goes into whether the meeting is going to be open or closed.
There's no function for it to be a closed meeting within those committees. The only portion that would be potentially closed, and it also opens those students up to FOIA if it continues to be a school board advisory committee in a different way than if it was an advisory committee to the superintendent. I'm not suggesting that we don't have clarity of documents in other areas, but it's the length at which it opens it up to FOIA, I think, is part of our concern.
I think that's one of the questions that should be answered.
So if you will send me the questions you want specifically answered, or you have them, I mean, I have some, but I just want to make sure that we capture them all so that we can ask staff, so that you can be satisfied, and we can also ask Mr. Foster the legalities so that it's all done correctly. That helps.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So the other thing that was brought up to us last session, not last session, what was brought up to us was a forum topic by our previous student representative about adding another student representative to the board. And so the question that we had just started to discuss was what that would look like. If there is another student representative, what that would look like, how the division of labor would be, what that would look like. It wasn't very clear. We really hadn't gotten deep into what that was going to look like. And so before we recommend, or if we're going to recommend to the school board that we should have a second student representative, I think the discussion of what that second student representative's role would be. Would it be an alternate role? Would it be, will, you attend every other meeting? Will, having that definition to help the students out. And when it was brought as a forum topic by the previous student representative, she really didn't have, clear idea of what that would look like. And so I think that that's something that we should look at and discuss to think about what that may look like so that we can give the students guidance on how that would look like if that was the decision we wanted to make.
I think if we pursue this, in the options you mentioned, it should be an alternate. So if the main student representative cannot attend a meeting, then that person could fill in. But I wouldn't envision much of a role beyond that.
I think that it's worthwhile to look at what other areas are doing, and I think that that was one of the things that Ms. Green brought up, is the fact that we have other school districts that have significantly reduced numbers of students, and they have 2 members, or like 2 student representatives. And so I don't think, during the discussion last year, I don't think anyone was suggesting that both would be present on the dais with us during meetings. I do think that it would be interesting to look at them. The concern I have with alternate is it automatically creates a hierarchy within the student rep, and I'm not sure who's going to designate that hierarchy. And so I'm wondering whether or not we have maybe a student rep come from, right now I believe it's from SAC that the student rep is brought forward. I don't think, we never got as far to talk about whether or not that would be where the second student rep would come from, or whether or not there was another group that it could potentially provide. And I guess my question is, would it make sense for us to have it be that it was a half-time, so you had both? I don't know. I mean, it's definitely an interesting discussion. I think that we need to come with some sort of recommendation to the board as to how to move forward in time enough this year to make sure that that second person can get put in place. I also wanted to let everybody know that Ms. Cream and Mr. Jackson from our staff and Dr. Anderson, I believe, are working together to create a handbook for the student rep so that we can capture some of that information. Ms. Cream was interested in doing that, and she's working with Ms. Swant too. So that way we're going to have something moving forward to create some sort of continuity between each representative as it moves forward. So that was kind of the solution, because Ms. Green was very interested in staying affiliated with the board. So we wanted to make sure that we took advantage of that interest. So
I would not envision creating another process for selection. I think, what we've seen over the years is that the interest in this has exploded, right? So pre-pandemic, when Moonshine and I were on the board, it was typically about 30 to 40, maybe I would say 20 to 40 candidates each year, 30 to 40 being the highest. I know the past couple of years there's been upwards of 120 or so candidates. So that's already a massive pool. You don't have to be a member of the SAC to run. If we were to go down this path, I would envision it as being the runner-up, in that race. But at the same time, I think I'd have to go to SAC bylaws to check, but I think the runner-up actually becomes the SAC president. So we would just have to play around with that.
So part of just to throw a wrench into the thought process of this, is I have noticed that consistently the student reps are from certain geographic areas. And I'm wondering if we should consider having student reps that are from, and I don't know how we would do this, I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, because in terms of having representation of student reps from a different geographic area that is underrepresented traditionally. That's just something that I've noticed, that consistently it seems that our student reps are from very certain geographic areas, and then other geographic areas are not covered, my district being one of them. So I don't even know we want to, again, that's throwing a wrench into the mix, and then how would that work? And, but just something that I have consistently thought of is like, I always see student reps from certain parts of the county.
Madam Chair, I don't recall all school board, student school board representatives, but I definitely remember a gentleman from Mount Vernon High School.
Kimberly from Lewis.
And we have one from Lewis. We have another from South County. And so Lake Braddock, I recall all those student representatives. Last several years might have been different. Who knows? But I wouldn't say that there are underrepresented areas in the county where student representatives are coming from. So with that said, could somebody refresh my recollection as to some of the rational reasons given by our student representative advocacy for additional school board member? I think that will go a long way in making a decision as to whether we should add one more position and what that additional position will do, or how will additional a appointee student representative be able to work with the one that we normally invite to join us. So could someone, do we have something somewhere about the rationale behind? I think it might have been a forum topic that came, and then there was a rationale.
Yeah, it was in the forum topic. I don't,
Do you know where I could go? Was it like trying to, is a workload issue on the part of student representative?
I think it was,
or?
she had recognized the fact that we had particular areas that she only really knew her geographic location. And it was really hard for her
Difficult to
necessarily,
walk.
for her to understand what was going on in other areas. I think the Student Advisory Council obviously works on that to give information, and she was very active, making sure that she was connected with what they were bringing forward. I do think that I think that having the sheer possibility and opportunity for another student with a county as large as ours wouldn't be a horrible decision. I also wondered whether or not it made sense to pick a junior for the runner-up, or for the second position, that could then learn, and we can kind of move it forward as the second year. They could potentially apply to be able to move forward and create some sort of continuity with that. I don't know if it needs to be professionalized that significantly. I think that for the kids that generally apply, it's probably a 2-year commitment is probably too much. So it's just one of the things. I just know that Miss Kareem was one of the first that I've heard of in a while as a junior. And so creating some sort of continuity to move forward was part of her desire. And she really wanted to stay involved with what was going on with the school board. So trying to capitalize on that. So that was really her main driving force. Was what she had actually suggested and PEC did not pick up, was that she was asking us to appoint her as the second for the year. And so as a way to get the ball rolling and move things forward. I don't disagree with Mr. McElveen that it makes sense to me to have it just be that SAC kind of gets both going and represents both. What I would say is that this is something I've heard at multiple levels, that it would be very helpful if they would let us know when the process is happening, so that we can actually get word out to our communities that the application is open. It also would help that we know when the election is occurring, so that we know. It's oftentimes the clerk's office just receives notice that here's your new school board member. And I'm not saying that the school board needs to, our members need to be involved with the process, but it would be nice to be able to ensure that we're getting
We
that
used to
out.
be invited. We used to invite it.
It just would be nice for us to support that person as they were elected in by their peers. So.
Now, just for the, at least for the sake of sharing, the last time we had 2 board members, 2 student representatives, were 1994, 1995 school year. We had 2 at the time. because of a certain necessity they ended up having to at the time. And they took turns sitting at the dais. As I recall, at each meeting, even the second one, who was not sitting at the dais, always showed up and was in the audience. So I'm open to it. Whether I'll be open to having a runner-up automatically becoming a student representative the following year, I probably not prepared to support that because that will preclude seniors becoming, right, running and then becoming a runner-up because seniors will graduate. So I don't want to create that situation that, I think SAC will probably want to explore this a little more and bring us a little more concrete proposal rather than us trying to dictate how, if the board blesses two-member concept, how the SACs that to be implemented. Something that if a student representative already has had that done, then that would be great. If not, maybe give that as a task to come back to us within a couple of months, let us know exactly how they are proposing it, so that we can make a decision in time if the board wants to do it for the next year's elections.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. And in fact, Rita is on the SAC. I think she's probably a board member, so she could certainly bring it to them and ask for their
Yeah.
input. And then just one other thing.
April 16th was when the forum topic
Okay.
was, in case you need it.
One other thing is that, the whole reason for the initial creation and reinvigoration of the School Board Student Leadership Development Program was to create that pipeline and to draw on the underrepresented geographic regions and make sure that those kids are aware of the fact that the position exists. And I know juniors are, it's freshmen, sophomores, and juniors are part of that process. So the concern I would have about having a junior automatically choosing from a junior class for that alternate, you would preclude the people in the leadership development program who are juniors. Right?
I'm not advocating for that. I'm just letting you guys know that that was part of the discussion last year, so.
I love the idea of having that second student rep. It's just providing the guidelines of what that's going to look like. And I'm glad you brought up, Mr. Moon, that at one point there was that situation, and from your remarks, it seemed that it was workable. And one of the things that Rita did say, and for us to explore, is that it does happen in jurisdictions that are smaller, because it's a lot of work for those kids, and they have a huge workload themselves. I feel really lucky that I'm sitting next to our student rep this year, and being able to have little sidebar discussions with her about, her work, I have to leave because I have a test tomorrow, or I have to do this, and she's still there, but she's like, I'm still going to go home and study for my test. So it's a heavy workload for them. So having that second person might be helpful. But I'm really happy to hear that had occurred at one point.
If I may, in the past, we often saw, actually, I often saw student representative even participating at a work session, which hasn't happened for many years because I guess students get busier and busier these days, and they cannot find the time to come to the work session and to participate.
So does everyone feel comfortable with, as Mr. Moon has suggested, having the SEA develop some kind of recommendations, whereas we will look into some other things as well, and then coming back together to see how this could be fleshed out and see how we can bring that about? Does that make sense?
It does. I do think that this would need direction from the board, obviously, to make sure. The way that that would likely happen is that it's policy 1802 that we would need to adjust to account for the second person. So I do think that it would also be really helpful before we make any recommendation to the board is if we kind of look at the language that's utilized from other divisions to determine how they're using some of that information. I also think that in her capacity related to developing that manual, I think that Ms. Kareem would be willing to do some of that data collection for us, and if we asked her to. So I think that it would help her flesh out some of that.
Ms. Anderson, this obviously, any change is going to require the full board's a consent. But before we go to full board, it will make a lot of sense for the SAC to look into this a little more and bring us a little more detail so that we can bring the whole thing to the board. Otherwise, board will redirect. The SAC may redirect SAT to study a little more and come back. So let's do the legwork first and then present the whole thing to the school board for consideration.
The only reason and I agree with you, the only reason that I'm slightly concerned about that is that this was not a recommendation from SAC. So I don't know that they care about whether or not they have two board members. And so that's the reason that I'm suggesting that Ms. Kareem might be the person that could do some of that legwork for us. And maybe, particularly if she is still on SAC, then it would make sense for her to bring that to her colleagues on that committee to determine whether or not they wanted to provide input to us. Otherwise, us sending it to SAC, I don't even think they know that it's going on. So it may look like.
Could you ask Madam Chair you to have that conversation with student representative or Kareem and see whether they can be brought to the SAC for discussion?
Definitely. Both of them are very, very invested in this, and they're like raring to go. So I think that we can harness their youth and enthusiasm for this. So definitely, and I do think they're interested in bringing it to everyone. So we'll definitely do that. I will speak with them and then try to establish a timeline so that we can start working on this so that it could be something that we can look into next year. I mean, have in place so that it can be initiated next year.
Yeah, it would be very helpful to get the dates from SAC to determine what their timeline is this year so that we will know how to reverse engineer that to make sure that we have the information to them before that happens.
So does anybody have any other things they'd like to bring up regarding to this?
I think I mentioned about student representative in the past from time to time participated in work session discussion. Depending upon topics, it really was helpful to hear student perspective on the issue directly related to them. But for the last several years, that hasn't happened. So that's something I truly miss. That I would love to really encourage student representative, again, depending upon the issues, give them an opportunity to let us know what they think on certain things.
So you said that in the past, and I think this is where your institutional memory can help us. Is it that they were invited in the past and they haven't been invited now?
They have a right to join us at any work session, but for at least for the last number of years that somehow they have not been able to come to the work session. I don't know if it's a scheduling issue because a lot of our work sessions are during the day and they don't want to miss classes. So perhaps that could be another thing that SAC could look into and see, make a suggestion to us. If you're talking about, for example, that this is already going on, but I'm just giving that as an example. If you're going to talk about cell phone policy, that directly affects 100,000 kids' life every day. And if they could bring student voice when you are having that discussion, I mean, that would only help us in making really the best of decisions.
So in the past, when they were having work sessions and they would, I'm trying to understand this because I agree with you and I'm trying to try to flesh out why there's been less participation. In the past, were the work sessions, they were in the evening, so it was easier?
Yeah, we had evening work sessions, but we also had, day sessions where student representatives were able to come. I don't know, maybe the student representative took this as a little, put this on a higher priority list to be able to come
Right.
to join us for a couple of hours on certain issues and be able to go back to school.
Right.
Don't know, but that's probably something that we want to inquire of SAC or student representative, how they wanted to be able to really participate, be a little more meaningful to us as a student representative, student's voice.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's probably been since 2017, 2018, since that's been pretty regular. And, they do get paid for every meeting they attend. So I think we could also talk to Kevin just to understand, Deputy Clerk Kevin, just to understand, how it's being communicated to the students and what kind of feedback he's getting about that.
Probably also need to double check with Mr. Foster about whether or not there's any legal impact to employing a student during the school day, is particularly just to make sure that we're not violating any rules. Just to double check on that.
Yeah, we never had that trouble before, but
Mr. McElveen, you mentioned the Student Advisory Council, like bylaws. Did you have any idea where those live?
So the person that currently oversees SAC is Craig I forget what his last name is, Craig Perrier. So he would be the person to contact about that. I don't know physically where they reside.
I know, so one of the thoughts that we were looking at and considering, and I'm going to defer again to Ms. Anderson on this because she was looking at considering this, you were talking about considering them an intern? Did I misunderstand that? In terms of how we compensated them and if they were an intern versus, just because of the question you just brought up
Well,
about,
one of the things is that we have a survey right now that we're hoping that more board members will talk about, is right now they're paid hourly for the time that they're at the meeting. We're trying to make sure that that is in line with minimum wage, which is, I think, an important aspect of this. But I also wondered whether or not, if we looked at it as a stipend per month, depending on how we did what we did, because I know that there are other things that aren't necessarily put in for hourly reimbursement. And so we want to, I think that moving forward with this, if we're going to consider that policy, that may also be something that if we're going to open that policy, we may want to look at that as well.
I would welcome I'm sorry, Madam Chair, that our division council look into that. It didn't occur to me that we are paying them based upon hourly. In the past, just like a school board members, that we get certain amount, fixed amount, no matter how many hours we do or we don't. So it was the same thing to the school board representative, student representative. They have certain amount per meeting where it is open to public and also minutes are kept.
Yes, I agree that they have a significant number. They also have a significant number of events that they're pulled into in other areas. And so I do think that it would be worth it to look at it as like a monthly stipend, particularly if we're going to bring 2 people in. And then we'd have to determine how we're going to differentiate the pay if one's a runner-up and one's a full member. Like that's part of it. And that's the other reason that I wanted to ask whether or not it made sense to just have two representatives. And so that was part of the reason.
So, Madam Chair, could I ask you pose those questions to a division council to see as we continue pursuing this?
Yes, and so right now, when we were just talking about the payment per meeting and hours, and it occurred to me that if, and something that we'd have to look at legally, if the monthly stipend, when it was like, can that person be here legally during school hours? If it's an internship and a learning possibility, then do you know what I mean? Like if the thought occurred to me, if this is an internship for them, then it's considered also a learning opportunity. So we may not be getting into trouble if they want to come to a work session during the school day legally, if it's designated as an internship for them and they're getting a stipend, but as opposed to how they're paid. Might make a differentiation.
I think in the past, if they needed to come to a school with work session during the day when they're having classes, I think that they were given excused absences, and so that they could come and participate and do his or her duty as a school board representative. We were not really hiring that person for 2 hours or 3 hours, but the student representative was doing his or her work as a student representative, and we provided stipend, So that's how we did. We didn't consider that as hiring someone or providing an internship program.
I understand what you're saying, but I'm not a lawyer, and I think that, I don't know if legally, if they're paid hourly per meeting, then if that's considered a hire. I don't know, like, legally, if that's what that's considered. But if it's an internship, it might be considered differently. I understand what the spirit of what we have been doing has been, but as I have come to learn, being on this board, there are a lot of legal considerations that I never thought about that sometimes we've got to align to make sure that that's correct.
Let's ask for the legal
Yeah,
parameters
right.
from our division council and what's permissible.
Right.
What different options that we can explore, and ultimately it will be the board that will make a decision.
Right, no, and I totally agree with the spirit of it. But as I have learned, I will leave it at that. And I think that this will help with the survey that was put out. It will help inform the rest of our board members, the survey that was put out, that we've looked into it further and we can give further guidance. Is everyone okay with where we're standing with this right now?
Would it be fair to say that we'll gather that information, make sure everybody has it before the next meeting, and that way we can make a decision? Because otherwise, we're gonna be bumping up their deadline for applications and things.
Yeah, no, of course. So the next thing on the agenda is several board members have expressed an interest in creating new advisory committees. And to respect and honor that, and to respect and honor that times have changed, I'd like for us to have that discussion of, if we are going to consider new advisory committees, the process by which we go forward to determine which ones should be created, if there should be any that are created. I know there have been different suggestions. Most notably, the one that keeps coming up from different board members is, our fast-moving world and technology. And, everything from, obviously, you think about cell phones, AI, all of that. So that's one that I know has been consistently proposed, but there may be other interests based on how times have changed. So how we go about adding an advisory committee and which and how we consider which ones should be added. I would like to hear some thoughts, some ideas, some institutional memory of how some have been added, some have been removed.
Like, the process of adding it, from what I understand, is as simply as the board would vote it in and add it to the governance manual. So it's not hugely onerous a task that way. We would need to identify members of the community and have a period of time that we phase them in addition to the fact that there's some aspects of making sure that we have bylaws for those folks and things like that we would need to consider. I do want to make sure that we have feedback from all of our colleagues, and so I don't want it to just be something that we come up with, which I know you agree with. So what could we do to ensure a mechanism to collect feedback from everybody that we can look over during the next meeting?
So, Mr. Moon can certainly speak better to this, but up until I think it was 2006, when we did the strategic governance process, we had committees for transportation, for curriculum, and all those things. And the problem with that was that, one problem with that was that, many board members wanted to participate, and that's how you ended up with meetings every night of the week for various committees. And when they went through that strategic governance process, there's a lot of unhappiness because people didn't want to relinquish their oversight of curriculum or whatever. But I think the system we have come up with is a good one. I think the committees we currently have are good ones. I don't see much value in adding more, but I'm eager to hear what other people would propose.
You mentioned Technology Advisory Committee. I mean, that's something that I personally lack a lot of knowledge and expertise. So that's where I could get some benefits hearing from community not just from our professional, tech staff. So that's one. But one concern is a board ready to be able to deal with more committees, more reports, more discussions, more recommendations to which we need to provide the proper responses, which we have not always been successful doing that. So that is a concern on my part. As we add more committees, how much can we handle? That is but Technology Advisory Committee, if we're going to do with one less committee from the current committees and board feels that we could substitute something to that, and technology committees, I think it makes sense at this point. But beyond that, I'm not prepared to add more committees at this point.
I appreciate that feedback, and like you, Mr. Moon, I think something like a technology committee would be helpful because the world is moving so fast, and it has so many implications. And that's the one that I keep hearing from a lot of people coming up. Not saying that that's the one we'll add or not add. But I appreciate Mr. McElveen's words about how once you have something and then it's taken away, it can also be a problem. It can create a problem. That's something that I think it's up to us to decide, number one, whether we want to consider that, how we would, maybe discuss it with our colleagues, poll our colleagues to see if they have any suggestions of what they would like to see if we were to add some. And then if we get a lot of responses for one specific, then I think that's something we could consider and look at. I'm not I know a technology committee would be helpful for me in terms of what we have out in the community and the resources that we have in the community and the expertise that would help inform our whole division. But I don't know if there's other areas that other people would be interested that are not technology.
I think that, so this was originally brought up in a forum topic by Ms. Marin and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, that was the original reason that the operating manual was put in place. So that was the impetus for getting that moving forward. So this part of the forum topic that I brought forward last spring was really related to extending that conversation because I had heard from multiple people that they were interested. It's also not just advisory committees, it's standing committees. So it's whether or not we would want to add a standing committee related to any particular topic. I think that it's a really smart idea to go ahead and particularly since we've gotten pretty good at them, like let's just go ahead and survey, and the people who have a strong opinion, I would want us all to voice in as to what we thought were possibilities. And just, we can leave it as a open-ended question about whether or not people have ideas for committees that they would want to bring forward. I agree with both of my colleagues across the table is the fact that there are a lot of pulls on our time right now, and having additional committees and additional whatever they look like, is a heavy lift, so it would have to be a careful consideration by the board. I do also, being someone who is tech savvy, it doesn't necessarily mean that, it just means that I understand when they're talking to me. It doesn't mean that I know all of the technologies that they would bring forward, so I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. I would not want to step on the toes of our IT department to make sure that what we're representing is what's possible. So that's an aspect of it, but I definitely think, that Ms. Dix had also mentioned having it be more STEAM focused, which actually might be one perfect solution because we could have it be integrating multiple things that were going on, including the fine arts if we wanted to. And so it would be a place that it could have a home for lots of things to live in one place, including technology. So I just, if we're looking at this in terms of an eye towards issues that are specific to those categories, it might be something interesting to look at.
So my question is, do we do an open-ended survey of how you would, what kind of committees you would like to see, or what kind of, or do we give recommendations of what, the two that I have heard are technology and STEAM. And even though you say you're tech savvy and understand certain things, I'm not. So there, I mean, there's a level of fear about things I don't understand and how we're incorporating them in the division with our students. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is it a neutral thing? Or it depends on how it gets rolled out. And having those experts, many of whom do live in our county, that you know, we could maybe tap into. So would we do an open-ended survey saying, this is something that that we're thinking about, and if so, what would you like to see as a new standing and/or advisory committee, or do we give recommendations?
I think that we can have it be a decision tree type survey, so it can, do you think that we need to add any standing committees? Do you think we need to add any advisory committees? If so, what are your ideas for areas there? And that way we can just catch the big picture first and kind of weed it out and see what the answers are. It would be one of those things that if you had a particular member that was interested in one particular type of committee, if they could provide more information about what, you know, after the fact, you know, if we see a trend go on, provide more information about what type of charge that those folks would have, when would they, you know, and then we would probably have to put forward a direction as to when they would start. And so it would probably be that they would start up at the beginning of the next school year. So this isn't, I don't think this is as hugely a time-sensitive issue as we would work through it. So I think that it would be just a good opportunity for us to hear what our colleagues think and try to get them to interact on a one-on, like a individual basis as an easy way to capture information.
Does that sound good to everyone? Is that, And thank you for volunteering for creating the survey.
That's no big
This-
deal.
So this is basically what I had on the agenda today, so that we could kind of have an overview for our next meeting. You know, do follow up on this, but for our next meeting, I will be providing all of you, you know, asking you to do a little bit of work on looking into the new policy that we had, because we were going to act on what was decided on in terms of creating the toolkits, the webinar, all those things that we want to do, and getting your suggestions and recommendations of what you feel should be in those toolkits. The internal facing ones, the external facing ones, the webinar, so that we can move forward with the work that had been provided before and actually, or the recommendations, and actually complete what we were going to do, so that we could have the training for new people coming on to advisory committees, what the responsibilities of staff are, and the things that, based on some of your institutional memory, is important for some of, you know, new staff members coming into these advisory, or I should say staff, not meaning FCPS staff, but community members coming into our advisory committees. And that's something that we can look at and see how we can flesh that out. And I will be sending out information on that, because then we can move forward with that.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Is that it? Short and sweet.
Short and
Thank you.
sweet. I value your time.
I do have one question which Mr. Moon raised earlier, but just more broadly. You know, in the past, and I understand that for today, there may not have been much need for it, but in the past, we had been staffed by someone in DCCO, and I guess in this case, it would be Beth, right?
Typically, Lisa and Beth both come. Lisa is sick right now, and Beth was in another meeting. So just so you know, what we've done in the past year or so is that we've only requested them to come when we're actually talking about public engagement that's forward-facing to the community. Because when we're talking about internal board stuff, they don't necessarily have any feedback. I think that it would be really important for them to be at the next one, because that's where we're talking about developing tools that are going to be necessary to be forward-facing. So I think that it's huge. And I had talked to them last year about the fact that we were going to need their assistance, so.
We are now officially adjourned. Thank you for your time and your questions and your input.